Hello and welcome to episode 101 of Rebel City Podcast. Been a few weeks since we've been on, obviously, covered while online. So thanks for those who reached out to say hello and check in on us and stuff like that. Much appreciated. But we're just going to dust off and get straight back to normal. This week we're extremely lucky to have Natalie McLean. Hi Natalie, nice to meet you. Natalie's a representative of Sisco Recovery. This is actually a request that we got from a listener just before Christmas, thinking that there might be an organisation we'd enjoy speaking to, and we think they're right. So, Natalie, just to kind of introduce yourself, who are Sisco and what is it they're up to?
So Sisco, we were predominantly set up in 2016 to work within the Scottish Prison Service. What we done back then is we aligned ourselves with the drug strategy within the prison, and we created what we call a recovery cafe. Now, I know that it sounds like a place to come for tea and biscuits, but it's not. It's absolutely not a place to come for tea and biscuits. It's a very challenging environment within the prison. It's delivered by all members that deliver it and facilitate it have lived experience of criminal justice or lived experience of addiction or lived experience of homelessness, either direct or indirect. Now, that worked so well within HMP Berlin that HMP Shotts wanted us to replicate the model within the prison so that we could support some of the prisoners that were going to be transitioning back out to the community. We done that in 2018 and that still is ongoing. But you guys will know when we were faced with the pandemic, it was a case of the establishments all closed down to external support.
Yeah.
That didn't mean that guys weren't leaving prison anymore, and it certainly didn't mean that guys were going to be struggling in the community. So what we done in March was we looked at our model inside the prison and we changed it to adapt to a community approach, and we changed everything to be working out in the community, doing through care with prisoners. So we're very active in the local community just now in and around Glasgow, and we no longer just work with criminal justice. We're actually receiving referrals from all organisations across the board because we've not stopped working. We've continued. Mm-hmm. We looked at our approach and thought, okay, we can't do office work. Who says we can't go for a hill walk? Who says we can't go do some frisbee golf? So we were predominantly a prison-based recovery, drug and alcohol service, but we've now adapted out into the community.
It's amazing. Sounds like lockdowns, I mean, there's been a few people but that this has been the same for, but it sounds like it's been a positive thing for Sisco rather than the overall sort of negative thing that we're hearing about the lockdowns.
I don't ever try and look at anything in a negative context. I have to be honest. I always try and find a positive in something or look for a positive or create a positive. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we could have shut up shop and done nothing, like a lot of organisations done, but who would have benefited from that? Yeah. I certainly wouldn't work. I don't benefit working behind a computer. It doesn't benefit me because I know that we need to have a human contact approach with our client group. Mm-hmm. So it's been massively beneficial. It's given me time to look at expanding into the community, which was always the kind of dream to do that anyway. So we done it quicker.
So like the adverse conditions kind of forced your hand on something that you'd have maybe just kept sort of pushing away as like your day-to-day has been so busy. So, and that's really good, man. I think it's really good for people, even just in a general way, to hear somebody talk about, like, if you look for the positives, you'll find them. And like, more power to you that you've actually went out into the community to do the work rather than because that normal way has been taken away. So that's amazing, like, so good to hear.
Got to respect anybody who evolves in these scenarios to actually keep up the level of support that they're seeking to provide. I think one of the reasons that listeners recommended that we get in touch with yourselves was because in the past we've covered a number of sort of tangential subjects like ACEs, harm reduction, violence reduction, so on and so forth. How did you find yourself in this sort of area of work?
So I think if you look at most of the people that's in the field that we work in, most of the people have lived experience, whether it's direct or indirect. Something has happened in their life that gives them an understanding. So my background is very, very chaotic. I lived a very, very chaotic lifestyle. I grew up in a very disadvantaged area. My parents were both criminals. I had no role models in my life. So, I scored 10 on Adverse Childhood Questionnaire. I have had so many incidents happen in my life. My dad committed suicide in prison when I was 5 years old. And I had to go through all my own horrific experiences in life to find recovery. Then when I entered into recovery, the year after I got into recovery, another one of my family members died in prison. So when the prison asked me, you know, can you come and create something for us? It was an absolute yes, because I personally have been affected by 2 family members that left a prison establishment in a black body bag. And I think that no family member should have to face with that.
Yeah.
So then when you look at a child that's so broken, you know, you then look at attachment, you look at abandonment issues. And I grew up with all the adverse childhood experiences. But when I got therapy and got support for post-traumatic stress and really looked at my childhood experience and I got better, once I found a solution, I recognised, you know, if I can get better, and my childhood was horrific, guys, like it was really, really horrific for me and my sister. But, you know, if I can get through that, then I can show someone else the journey to get there as well. And that's why I'm so passionate about, I eat, sleep and breathe this work, because I just know there's something better for people.
This is one of the reasons I love having these conversations, like with, like, say, yourself, like James Docherty and other guys we've had on this, is that it's almost, you know, evangelical in a sense, where you're out there, you know, taking what you've learned and sharing that message with other folk. And like, it's so, I don't know, I take so much, you know, real enjoyment out of seeing people taking those lessons back into their community and actually like sharing these new ideas and this sort of new approach that we seem to be trying to develop in Scotland for these types of issues. Like,
Absolutely. I think when we did the ACEs episode with James, we were quite surprised at some of the backlash that we got, because we were sitting reading. I think I had heard about ACEs through mental health training, and when I read it, it was such a profound experience for me to read some of these experiences and think, I've got like 6 of these. And I don't even consider myself to have a traumatic childhood. When I thought about the people that were running about me in the scheme, I was like, wow, man, some of these, this is like a laundry list for this, just check for people that I know. But then when we shared that message, we got a lot of people coming back giving it the sort of, I'm all right, Jack. Well, I grew up with parents that were like this, and I grew up in Postal, and I grew up in Springburn, and I managed to get myself out. So this is a whole load of shite. Like, do you find that you get that kind of response sometimes in the community for people that have managed to pull themselves up with their bootstraps but feel like the people running about them should do the same?
Believe it or not, I get it from my own family. You know, some of my family are very much, when I was in a very, very bad place in my life, my family are very much, you know, pull your socks up and go on with it. You know, we grew up in disadvantaged communities, and we managed to get through. And I think that people don't understand trauma unless you're in the trauma, and that's just the reality, and it affects everyone differently. You know, you look at me and my sister, both grew up in the same environment, we both experienced the same traumatic events in our life. I went down one road that was chaotic, and it was addiction, and it was, you know, very, very dark, whereas my sister is a millionaire who lives in California and has a fantastic lifestyle. You know, so we are two of the same people that grew up in the same environment, yet how we dealt with life was very different. And I also see it in my own children. You know, my children spent the first few years of their life in my addiction too, because I didn't get clean until 8 years ago, and my kids are 11 and 14. So I see some of the traumas in their life. You know, my oldest son is he's like the Mariana Trench, you know, he pushes things down, he doesn't want to talk about it, whereas the younger one is very explosive. And very similar to my behaviours. You know, I was very explosive. I always had to be seen and heard, and it was because I was screaming out. There was pain inside. You know, so because I have that understanding of it, I can nurture that in my own children and support them through the trauma that they saw in my addiction.
Yeah, and I think that's so important as well for people that have kids to, like. So another thing that I did personally, I remember like being younger and my mate telling me about his big brother who was a previous heroin addict who went into drug counselling. And at the time I was about 16 or 17, and I can remember thinking, like, how can he be a counsellor? Like, just that childish, immature mindset of thinking, no, it needs to be somebody that's went to uni and knows what they're talking about and a professional. As I've got older, I realised just what you said there, like, you're going to stop that trauma. You're going to stop that cycle of trauma in your children because you recognise it. And it takes for people, I don't think people can actually understand it unless they live it. You know, I don't understand it. I've never had like a serious drug addiction. I've had other addictions, but I'll never ever understand what it's like to grow up in a household where the parents are an alcoholic or the parents are a drug addict, but you do. And so like you're going to stop that. And I think it's so important that people that do live through trauma and addiction and these things that we get that make our lives like adverse, that we then, once you recover, that you share that message. And I think it's amazing that you're doing that. It's amazing to hear you say that you recognise that in your kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel so much. I think
it might be a bit of a sort of cliched term in the context of the conversation we're happening, but like what I think about when I hear about these new ideas like ACEs, violence reduction, obviously recovery cafes, like we've had Recovery Dundee and stuff previously, is sort of breaking the cycle. And in the past, I've always had the impression of like people who have to go through the prison system that there is almost a kind of cycle that a lot of them have had to go through because there is no realisation of their trauma. There is no ability to really actually rehabilitate people. It's always been about punitive measures. And, you know, I think we're coming round to the fact that they don't work or, you know, they don't work to the extent that we hope they do anyway. Do you think that's a fair reflection of like the work that you're trying to do is to actually like give people options to step out that cycle?
One of the biggest problems I think that we have in Scotland is we're great at writing policies, but when it comes to practice, we're very, very poor at it and it's very disconnected. And I think that it's great that organisations shout about, you know, we're very trauma informed, we work in a person-centred approach, but these are the organisations that are still dictating to their clients what the clients need to do. When I say that we work in a trauma-informed manner and that we are person-centred, that means that I know that every prisoner that comes to me is going to come with a different set of difficulties, you know, something different is going to happen in their life. So their care plan's got to be what they need, not what I think they need. You know, I don't know what they need. So they've got to come to me and say, you know, I'm completely broken. I was abused as a child. I have a dysfunctional family. I don't have any housing. So then I can work with that. So for me, I think shouting about, oh, let's do restorative justice because it's really good and doing a campaign for 6 months, who are we serving when we do that? Is that just to generate more money? You know, I think that we need to get better. I think that it's slowly starting to change. And here's the thing, like the Scottish Prison Service are outstanding in what they tried to do, but it's aged. It's, you know, it's aged, it's really old, but what they're recognising now is that by bringing individuals like me into the establishments, they're getting better outcomes. When a prisoner goes to, for example, speak to a staff member or an NHS staff nurse, and this is no offence to the staff in there because they're wonderful, they get resistance because they're working with boys that have resisted a system their whole entire life. So they're up against resistance. Whereas if I go to a prisoner and say, listen, I've sat in the same seat as you, I've had the exact same experiences as you. What is going on with you? Like, how can we make your life better? You start to see their vulnerability and they open up. So the systems are starting to slowly change, but I still think we're so disconnected in Scotland. It's so, everyone wants to work in conflict and isolation, and it's purely down to funding streams. Whereas if everyone got small pockets of money, we could all work together in harmony and it would just be a better music sheet.
So you're saying the budgetary confinements are essentially pitting these against each other when in actual fact it would be much better if these were able to work, as you say, in more sort of harmony.
And that's what happens, and it's happened in Scotland for years. Then you've got the big organisations that squeeze out the grassroots organisations. And again, it's all down to competition and funding. It's a very, very poor... It's very
Seems counterproductive, doesn't it?
It is, it's very, very poor. But I think that, you know, we've got Angela Constance that's come into the Scottish Government. She is, I hope, going to enforce massive changes around drug policy and how our large organisations work out here. And see if that happens, it will make my job so much easier because the guys will have choice. They'll have options. You know, it won't be a case of just go to your doctor and go on 80 ml methadone and stay on that for 10 years because we can't offer you any psychosocial supports.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one thing that screamed out at me, what you were talking about, going and connecting with these boys, like if they're in hospitals or prisons, and like you're saying, the police officer traditionally would come in and speak to them. They're not going to open up to them. But when you share that sort of personal experience with them, you're giving them empathy and acceptance. You're accepting who they are as a person. And it's just acknowledging that, like, that's not their fault. Like, I think there'll be a lot of sort of guilt and blame in an individual that watches their parent go into addiction. And so many of them, and I've met them myself as well, when I was young, I'll never do that. I'm never going to do that. And then they end up there. And it's that whole, how did I end up here? But when somebody like yourself comes in and goes, look, I've been where you've been, come on, open up to me, and they finally open up, it must be so liberating for them to actually just be heard for the first time, and for somebody not to think that they're just a wee scumbag or whatever, because that is what they're met with, like, on a daily basis, isn't it?
I was just going to actually just quickly follow up, because obviously when we were talking about this sort of change in attitude, and I think you touched on it as well, like, it's not just the institutional attitudes that need to change, and I think having these conversations can allow, like, the public attitude to change, because I think when it comes to people who have served time in prison, you know, when we talk about funding, when we talk about priorities and budgets and stuff like that, like, I think it's very much one of those things where a lot of the population go, well, it's just prisoners, like, they've made their choices, like, why should we care, why should we throw extra money, so on and so forth. And I think the work you're doing allows us to look at it and go, well, hold on, if we manage to stop people reoffending, then we're spending less money on, you know, accommodation, we're spending less money on treatment and, you know, all these other things. I find it a wee bit worrying, though, that I think down in England, I think when Johnson was, you know, won his election, what did he announce, like 6 new prisons? Is that, I don't know if they're just for England or whether that's going to be across the entire UK, but it seems that when we talk about that pushback, we've got the ideas and the people like yourself at one end, but the actual, you know, at a governmental level, they're looking very much more at expanding the sort of punitive side of it, which must be obviously a disappointment. But again, I don't know if that's just down in England or not.
Do you know, it's really frustrating, because if you would have watched Darren McGarvey's documentary last night on social classes, this is a perfect example of government want to keep classes. You know, they want to keep people in classes. They make money out of putting guys in jail, and that's the reality. But when we look at a cost-benefit analysis of the work that we do and what we save the taxpayer, so I'm all about the taxpayer, because the reality is I get my funding from organisations that taxpayers pay into. So I'm paid by the taxpayer to deliver a service to these guys to then save the taxpayer more money. So when we look at this in a cost-benefit analysis, we could save the government absolute millions in a year. So then why are we building more prisons? Why are we not building more rehabs? Why are we not building more supported accommodations? These guys are coming from the same set of skills as me, no life experience. They don't know how to manage their house. You know, we wouldn't put a 7-year-old child in prison because he didn't know how to manage life. And that's basically what we're doing. When I sit with these guys, it's sometimes I can sit with an over 50-year-old man and all I see is a child, a broken child that's never grown up, or that has grown up in a system and he's been dictated what he's going to be, what time he's going to get up, what medication he's going to be on, where he's going to stay. So then what choice do individuals like that really have? They don't have any choice. They've been so stigmatized by a society that they then believe that they're a label or a number, or they just forget who they are and just become a drug addict. To be in that place, it's very difficult then to come back out that place unless someone is willing to invest in you and say, you know, I'm going to believe in you until you believe in yourself, and I'm going to support you to achieve whatever goals you think that you need to achieve to stay out of prison. And that's what these guys don't hear. They never hear, like, what can I do to make life better for you? They just hear, it's time to get up, it's time to eat, it's time to brush your teeth, come and get your meds, you know, go to PE.
Yeah, sounds like school.
It pretty much is like school, you know. So if these guys work very well with routine inside prison, which they do, why can't we train them to work well with routine out in the community?
Yeah, but it just shows you that, and if you think about it like that, because I've never had it framed like that for me, what type of psychological turmoil does somebody go through if they spend 20 years in a rigid routine of awake, shower, meds, workout, exercise, right, blah, 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 amazing. Now, you've been here, you've served your time, off you pop, no routine, what are they going to do? They're going to go straight back into addiction because it's what they know. So that the outside world must be petrifying for somebody that's been in such a tight routine, and then for it to just be like left and you're off to your own devices. So I think that, so I take it that there's been a lot of failings in the sort of post-prison experience for a lot of people, I take it.
I think there's just failures right across the board. I just think it's really, really difficult. Like some of the guys that you're speaking about, I'll work with them in prison, and then when they're about to leave, they don't want to leave because the fear is I'm going to get a sleeping bag when I leave here, or I'm going to go to a hostel, and the hostel that I'm going to go to is going to be surrounded by addiction and crime. So then when you work with these guys, some of them say, you know, I would just want to go back to prison. I know what I need to do in prison, you know, I know when I need to get up, people tell me what I need to do, because they cannot live life on life's terms. They don't know how to, and unless we invest time and effort into these guys, they're going to just continue to become that product of a broken system.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing that I wanted to say is that there was a point that you had said earlier about the cost-benefit analysis, and we're actually starting to see, even just in the workplace, that the cost of mental health issues is in the billions. So you're saying we could save the government millions. You could be saving them billions by rehabilitating people properly, because it costs private businesses something like $5 billion a year just in the sick days that people take with sickness and diarrhea, which we're starting to see is probably stress and anxiety. So the amount of money that could be saved just by, like you're saying, organising the rehabilitation of people that are addicts, not criminals, it would run into the billions. I just want, I'll edit that into the bit that you said that, because it's got to be a wild number that they spend. But like you had said, where does that money go? Well, it goes to their mates. Do you know what I mean? That's why, like you're saying, they want to keep class in place, because if they start to rehabilitate people properly and save the taxpayer money, it's less money going to the people that actually own the businesses that supply the services to the prisons. And this is where I get really frustrated with working class people that stick to that sort of bullshit line of like, well, they deserve it. And it's like, you're just being indoctrined and with propaganda for a government, mate. Like, genuinely, like, you should turn around, look at the people that were running about you and try and raise them up. No, just hit them down because you managed to get yourself out. It's like,
realise that a lot of the people we're talking about are the guys that we grew up with and the guys that we went to school and could quite easily have been us, but bar, you know, the course of events. One of the things I kind of wanted to just touch on, because obviously we're talking about how each individual person you work with has, you know, an individual plan for their sort of release and recovery into the community. What types of techniques and what types of sort of processes do you actually use without obviously breaching anybody's, you know, confidentiality or anything like that?
Yeah, so we work using a whole person approach, and a whole person approach is basically everything under the one banner. So it's like their physical, their emotional, their mental health, their occupational, their educational. So it's right across the board about, okay, what's your journey going to look like when you leave? Where are you going to stay? What's your family support? What's your physical health like? Are you on any medication? What type of support do you need? So do you need a wraparound support, which would be 3 or 4 mentor sessions a week and online access to the groups and a group activity? Or is it just more a phone support? You know, so it's very, very tailor-made. But an example is I've been supporting a younger individual. He's only a younger boy that has grew up in absolute carnage and chaos. Mum's an alcoholic, dad was a heroin addict, in and out of prison, both of them. Very, very, lots of domestic violence in the house. This wee guy has done absolutely fantastic during his prison sentence, very much a role model prisoner inside the prison, works great with routine, you know, takes really, really, if I give him constructive criticism, he doesn't blow up on me, you know, he takes it on board, he'll write it down and then he'll reflect on it and maybe phone me and say, I'm just starting to understand what you were saying to me there. I've worked with that wee guy. Now, we got him into a hostel when he first left prison. But for someone that's managed sobriety for 9 months in prison, to go to a hostel in a community where it's chaotic, surrounded by drugs, his mental health was deteriorating, he was suicidal, and he was going to attempt suicide. So thankfully the house really listened to us when we said, you know, you're going to be held accountable unless you get this wee boy moved into a temporary accommodation on his own. You know, his mental health is not going to allow him to stay alive anymore. We got moved into a temporary accommodation, but my naivety, not realising this wee guy has came from trauma, therefore he has no life experience, he has no life skills. Every couple of hours I would get a phone call from him. The cooker's broke, I can't get it to work, or, you know, my electricity is not going on. So I'm having to go down and say, oh, I forgot to say, yeah, that's your electricity key. So we need to go and put money in that, and that gives your electricity. Or your cooker's not working. Okay, so that switch there is to put your cooker on. When, you know, these guys don't know the basics of how to live. That's the basics that you know, as much as my childhood was very, very traumatic, I had a mother that loved me that didn't take drugs. She was just a criminal, but she came for that because she had a really shit childhood too. So she only gave me what she knew to give me as a parent, you know, and that's what we're seeing with these guys. They don't have good role models that can teach them, this is how you look after yourself, this is how you make a bed, this is how you know, they don't. So we're having to parent them right through their whole journey, get them safe in their accommodation, and then look at, okay, what psychosocial supports do we need to put in place? So that is the typical journey of someone.
That's intense. Like, so much of what you're talking about there, as you say, like electricity keys and, you know, switching on a cooker and various, I mean, there's so much that you take for granted in your everyday life that it would be quite easy to miss it when you were explaining, you know, what day-to-day is going to look like for somebody.
I think, like, even from our personal experience, Matt, I know that our experience of learning these things, like learning how to use a wash machine, learning how to cook your own dinner, it happened at sort of uni time, and it was kind of funny and like fun. But if you're dealing with the fear of returning to normal life, for what we'll talk about, the routine, and then dealing with your trauma, you could imagine just it becoming overwhelming and just think, oh, fuck this, I'm just going to why even bother? I don't know how to do any of this. I just either want to get back to what I know, which is the prison system, or like you're saying, I'm just going to take my own life. And to even just think, I'd never even thought about somebody having to come out and a grown man having to learn the basics of keeping a flat going, and how even demoralising that would be, and how important it would be for him to have you there so that he can phone you and feel comfortable at doing that without somebody thinking, oh, you're a fucking idiot, like, what you doing? Like,
man of the house, chap, you know what I mean? Like, you're expected to be able to go into and, you know, look after your stuff. It be quite emasculating to not be able to control your business because you've never been shown how, you know what I mean?
And that's very tough for a man in Scotland to admit that, because we're very much, men in Scotland are very much, you know, you don't talk about your emotions, you just go on with it, because we're very hard Scottish men, and, you know, and so for a man to break down and become vulnerable, it's more difficult than it is for a woman. You know, women like to talk to other women, and we talk about our feelings and emotions, and we're very comfortable with that. But for a man to do that, it's very difficult, because he then loses a sense of his own dignity and saying, actually, I don't know how to do anything. Can you really, really help me? And it's really
absolutely
hard. It's really, you know, we had one guy that didn't want to tell us how broken he was, and didn't want to tell us that his living environment consisted of a flat 14 up with nothing in it, nothing at all. Nothing, and I mean nothing, bare floorboards, you know, and it took our mentors to go up, because we couldn't get a hold of him, to actually see what he was living in and say, right, okay, you know, we need to get your house decorated, we need to get you furniture, we need to, it's a pride thing. Some guys don't want to talk about how difficult their life is, because they want to hold on to that tiny bit of dignity they might have.
And I mean, I can relate to that, but it's quite harrowing to think that, you know, even when, because you would think that if you were coming out of the prison system and that you'd managed to get yourself to a place where you've got your own wee gaff now and you're starting to, you know, build this new life, I would naturally think that, you know, coming out of the system and having your own wee place and starting to put the building blocks of your life together could potentially be a really positive thing for somebody to focus on. But the notion that other people's reality is that they've literally been handed a set of keys to a shell of a house and just left to themselves is like, it's quite harrowing. And I can get why somebody would be, you know, reluctant to volunteer that, because they would be maybe sitting thinking to themselves, well, I'm supposed to feel good about this. This is me. I've got my own front door again, and I've got, you know, neighbours, and but in actual fact, what they've got is just so many challenges that, again, they're not maybe personally equipped to handle. But it's so interesting to see, like, the other side of it in that respect, because it is challenging even my own assumptions about it.
How much does the therapeutic process help people post-prison? So, like, actual counselling and therapy, or CBT, or whatever it is that they go through, like, how important is that?
It's not important, it's a priority. So for me, learning about my addiction, so putting the drugs down for me, putting drugs and alcohol down for me was the easiest thing for me to do. You know, I was abstracted actually. I had been sectioned 3 times towards the end of my using, mandatory section by the prison, 28 days. I was a danger to myself and others, you know, and at the end of that, I had a really good community addiction worker that really listened to me, and she would hear me, and I was saying, you know, you need to take me out of Glasgow, you need to remove me. You know, my community was chaotic for me. It's the place where there was lots of damage and trauma. So I was fortunate enough to be abstract and put into Castlecraig, which was a great residential. Putting the drugs down was easy. So then the minute I got sober, in my head was everything I had ever tried to escape from.
Mm-hmm.
The pain, the hurt, the trauma, the rejection, the abandonment, the violence. You know, I was left with all that. So thankfully, I was in a safe environment where I could receive grief counselling, trauma counselling. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. So I was then able to look at, you know, the trauma in my life was never my fault. As a child, you know, I wasn't responsible for what people done to me. That wasn't my fault. I couldn't be held accountable. So it was learning ways to manage and, you know, let go of what other people done to me and really look at what I could work on. So for these guys, you know, we can't just expect them to reduce on methadone and come off drugs and be better, because what they're left with is the head. So it's like all the stuff they've ever ran away from.
Yes, that's
so
it.
We absolutely must be able to offer counselling. We must be able to say, you know, we see your trauma, we see you, we recognise the pain you're in, and we're going to look at avenues to support you. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're just getting someone clean and sober, and we're leaving them with the same emptiness that they used drugs for to begin with.
Yeah, perfectly put, man, perfectly put. I think that's just the big thing, isn't it? The drug addiction, that's a symptom of a deeper set of emotional traumas. And like you're saying, and what Matt's saying there, people think once the addiction's gone, it's like sunshine and lollipops and people skipping through the park and post-addiction recovery. Life must be amazing. It's like the opposite. You go back to the darkest place that you've been, and it's then the chance to rebuild. And just knowing that you need somebody's support and somebody's guidance to start that rebuilding process is so, like, nice for me to hear as a mental health professional, but as somebody that knows that there's a 6 to 8 week wait to even speak to a counsellor on the NHS, that 6 to 8 weeks could be somebody's death, you know, like, it must be really hard even for you guys to source that level of care that these guys and women, and children as well that are in the prison system, so desperately need. It's just, there's like a sort of bittersweetness to it when I hear the therapeutic process really does help people in a real way, but also I know that these services are so stretched and people can't get to them. Is there, like, just to actually, like, anybody listening to this, to actually, like, show them? Because I think when you get a referral for the NHS, you get 2 sessions, and then you go down to a fortnight, and then you get another 2 sessions, you go down to 4 weekly, you get another 2 sessions, and that's it. So it's 6 sessions, and it's 2 weekly, 2 fortnightly, 2 monthly, and then gone. How many sessions of, like, psychotherapy, if you don't mind me asking, again, like, no breaking confidentiality, on average, do you think it would take for somebody to get the proper care that they need to recover from trauma?
So just to give you a bit of insight, I still receive counselling and I'm 8 years sober. I receive counselling every week and I will never put an end date on it. So just to give you insight, I don't wake up in the morning and it's like, glory be, hallelujah, let's just smash this day. Like, I still have an addict's head, which is very loud in the morning. My head will tell me, what are you getting up out of bed for? Who do you think you are? Supporting people, you can't even support yourself. You're not a CEO, you know, so it'll be very, very... So I have a program that I practice every morning. I get down on my hands and knees and I pray to my higher power, which is the universe, to give me some guidance and direction through the day. I really challenge my thought process. I'll usually do either a guided meditation or I do lots of shamanic exercises. So I'll go outside and ground myself. And then if my head's still loud, I need to phone someone and be like, oh my God, I woke up and my head's telling me I'm a useless bastard this morning, and have a bit of banter, because it then breaks the power of what's going on in my head.
Yep.
So that's me, 8 years, and I am surrounded by, like, James Docherty is one of my best friends. I'm surrounded by guys that are entrenched in this work. You know, I have amazing support round about me. So if that's me, someone that's independent, quite confident in their life, that has that loud head. What is someone that's going to be a week or a month, or like you say, a couple of months sober? What's their head going to be like? It's going to be just as noisy.
Yeah.
So you can never put an end date on someone's support. And I think it really pisses me off when services say, you know, we're going to work with you for a year and this is what we expect to see within that year. Well, anything can happen in someone's life. We don't know what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow or the next day. So who am I to say to someone, you're a tin of Heinz beans and you've got an expiration date next year, so that's how long we're going to work with you. We say to people, we'll work with you until you feel ready to move on to something else.
That's amazing. And to hear somebody, like, I just want to just say, like well done on the daily work that you do, because this is one of the big things that even I see in my clients, and I see amongst a lot of people, is this therapeutic resistance, because they think, I'm going to come here and you're going to fix me and that's it. So, and it's like, look, I'm going to guide you on telling you what you need to do every day to keep yourself well, because physical fitness, mental fitness, it is all a daily practice. And it's amazing to hear you say that you meditate, because I've spoke so much about meditation. I meditate every day, and listening to you say that you challenge your thoughts, that must be really amazing for somebody that's maybe coming out of addiction and thinking, what's wrong with me? I'm 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 8 years clean, and I'm still dealing with my demons. It's like, unfortunately, that might be forever, but you need to do the work daily so that you don't end up letting that rule your life. So that's amazing to hear you say that. Like, so good. Sorry, Matt, I just took it off.
Not at all, man. I'm completely with you on that one. What I was kind of wanting to move on to next was some of the support that, as you say, you've touched on about what happens when people leave prison. I feel as though, and we've had this chat with guys like Graham Armstrong and that, you know, previously, where somebody's conviction, you know, we talk about somebody serving their debt to society, and I can actually see the eye roll there, even as the words come out my mouth. But like, it doesn't feel as though that somebody coming out of a prison term is actually, you know, fully paid up. It seems as though we expect them to carry the burden of, you know, their actions or their circumstances for a lot longer than any prison sentence they've been given. And it is things like housing, it is things like jobs, it is, you know, there are areas where that time in prison could still have a really negative impact on somebody's life, even out with addiction, even out with trauma. Just the actual fact that on a bit of paper it says they were convicted of something. Like, at what point do we let people off the hook? At what point do we say, you know, like, this should not affect your ability to have a roof over your head? This should not, if you've not been violent, if it's, you know, there are maybe caveats in place, but this should not affect your ability to get a job and actually, like, go back into the community and be like a contributing member of society. I mean, the work that you're doing, I think, is trying to address some of that, trying to provide support in some of those areas. But like, societally, like, our attitudes need to change. And I don't really know how we get an idea of that big out there to people, that mistakes shouldn't have to follow people about their entire life.
And that's what happens. Like, even for me, because I have lived experience, I won't get round the same table as someone that doesn't have lived experience, someone that's just, you know, went to university and came from an affluent area and, you know, worked their way up. You know, they'll get round a table of power so much quicker than me. But then you have me that's educated myself, got myself better, it's getting stuck into my education. I need to jump through 10 circles to get round that, because people still have we don't know, because, you know, she's had a dodgy lifestyle. And here's the thing about prison, you can't take someone's liberty away from them and say, you know, they're rehabilitated. Well, what are we doing to rehabilitate them? Because you can't punish someone for being a drug addict. It tells us in the NICE guidelines, it tells us in every guideline that we have around addiction, that drug addiction is an illness. So if it's an illness, we wouldn't punish someone with cancer or someone with diabetes. You know, we wouldn't punish someone, but yet we punish drug addicts because they might go into Poundland and steal a couple of pounds worth of stuff, really petty stuff. So then we send them to prison for 18 months. So then what is the system teaching anyone? It's not teaching anyone anything.
Absolutely. I think that especially if somebody's stealing to survive, you know what I mean? And if they're stealing food to, like, we need to realise that a lot of the time people are stealing to feed their kids. They're not even, like, stealing to feed themselves. And that's what you're saying, like, society's teaching them that they're scum for doing that. And it's like, on one hand, it's like, we're told do anything to protect your family and do anything to do this and feed your kids, and you should do this responsibility.
But
and then
no
the
this.
but not that, because that's hurting this and that's hurting that. And in fact, you're going to, like Matt's saying, you go to prison and then you need to disclose that in applications for jobs. I think that for me, I mean, I'm sure there'll be somebody out there that would disagree with me, but I think once somebody's been to prison, served their time, why do they need to inform a fucking employer that they've done that? Do you know what I mean? Like, why is
nonsense,
that?
Paul. It's absolute nonsense. Like, the reality is convictions will carry someone almost for the rest of their life. And I know that Karen McCluskey is trying to make massive changes around, how we disclose convictions. Should we be disclosing convictions? But for the most part, a conviction will follow these guys around for the rest of their life, especially some of the guys that I've worked with, the longer term prisoners that came out and they have social work restrictions, they need to work with social work, they have to attend every appointment. They're for the rest of their life, they're going to be known as that individual that murdered someone when they were 17, when they were under the influence, when they were caught up in gang violence. They're now 50 years old, they're out in the community, they don't know jack shit because they've been in for so long. Technology's taken over, we've got fast cars, we've got, I just think it's a very disconnected system, and we could do it so much better. But then who am I? I'm just Natalie that was the wee addict. So sometimes my voice is not accepted or not listened to, but it just means that I stand on a higher platform and shout even louder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're the type of person, and that type of people need to be moving into politics. We need to, unfortunately, I'm not being an arsehole to anybody that's university educated, like you're saying, no lived experience, but that is who end up in Westminster. That's who ends up in Holyrood the majority of the time. People with no lived experiences. And we had Mary Black on 18 months, 2 years ago, and one of the big, real, poignant things that she said to me was that we were talking about Jacob Rees-Mogg, obviously we were talking about how much she a cunt is, but she was saying that one of the things that really confused her was that when she met them on a personal level, they're actually, she's like, if you take away their politics, they're nice enough people to you in the flesh. And she had a real sort of trouble sort of squaring that circle, and she came to the conclusion that they'll never know what it's like. How could they? You will never know what it's been like for him to be privately educated, have a nanny, and all the stuff that he's been through, which, whatever. But he will never, ever know what it's like for a kid growing up in Easterhouse. He'll claim it because he needs to get elected. He'll claim to know and claim that he's going to do everything he can, but he looks at everything through his privileged lens. And I think that as few people how do we fix politics and political reform? It's get people like you, get people that have lived through these experiences. Why are you not contributing to the drug policy in Scotland? Why are you not contributing to the prison policy in Scotland? James, why is he not there? Loki, why is he not there? Why is it that they're on the BBC, we're talking, coming on podcasts, we're doing media, but ultimately it's the privileged few that will make the decisions that actually impact this long term, and they need to be held accountable for that. Do you know what I mean? So as much as you're I'm just Natalie, your voice needs to be held more because you know what this is about. Do you know what I mean? We need to stop fucking giving 19, 20-year-old university graduates the position of power to make these changes. Do you know what I mean? I'll stop ranting now.
I just won't become complicit in the bullshit though, Paul. That's the thing for me, I won't, and the way I say it to my board is, I don't ever want to sit round a table with ball rubbers stroking each other's ego, because I don't want to be that person. Then you become complicit in the failures in the system. I want to be that person that's outside the tent, pissing on it, saying, here's the changes you need to make, and this is what you need to do. And everything that I talk about is from the voices of the people that I support. So they're not my words anymore. I don't use anything belonging to me. I've got my supports in place. My life is all right. I have lots of people round about me, but I'm taking everything that they're telling me, and I need to shout really loud. Here's an example. I took one of my clients to his community addiction worker last week. Now, this client who I've worked with for 5 years has been telling me my cat worker doesn't like me. He disrespects me. Anytime I ask him to reduce me on my methadone, he'll say, oh, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're going to put you up because you're still using. Now, as addicts, we can exaggerate things. We're very good at exaggerating things, actually.
Yep.
And I thought, maybe he's just exaggerating, you know, I'm going to go with him and just see if the experience is what he's saying it is. Now, that community addiction worker with me in the room turned around and said to my client, when are you going to stop playing the victim? When are you going to stop playing the victim? And when do you stop needing an audience? Now, my jaw dropped because I'm like, you're supposed to be trauma informed. You're supposed to be person-centered, and you're asking a guy that was abused by his two aunts his whole childhood, when are you going to stop playing the victim? So to that I says, you know, he is a victim.
He is a victim.
Have you ever read? Do you know anything about his life? Can I see his care plan? They don't even have a care plan.
That's wild. So is an addict actually asking for a reduction in the substance and faced just a personal attack as a result? I mean, I could understand if somebody thought they were maybe, no an attack, but I could understand somebody pushing back in authority if an addict was asking for more or whatever substance they're on, but to be asking for less and get that reaction is, I'm stunned.
And that's more common than you can imagine. Most of my clients will go to their addiction workers and ask for a reduction, and what they hear back is, we don't think you're ready yet. We don't think you're ready, and we don't think it's time for you. So let's maybe put you up a wee 5 mils or a wee 10 mils, and then we'll look at, you know, so they're encouraging them to go up on their dose.
Why?
Because community addiction workers are in a place where, not all of them, because there's some great workers out there, but a lot play God. And they want to dictate, you know, I know it's going to be really good for you, so I'm going to tell you what's going to work. When in reality is, they're university educated, they've never had any trauma in their life, they don't know what it's like to be on a prescription medication for 25 years and be chained to a chemist, but they're our best advisors. They're going to fix us and tell us how that life's going to be wonderful for us, and they're going to keep putting us up on a methadone because they think that's the right answer for us.
Considering that the message that we hear from ex-heroin addicts is that the methadone addiction is actually worse.
Yeah.
They find it harder to get off the methadone, and then we've got people within the system encouraging more. That, I mean, it is...
It seems so counterproductive to me, man.
Absolutely. On this point, do you feel like we should decriminalise drugs in Scotland, or in general, seem like the positive aspects of the Portuguese trials?
There's been something in America, Oregon. Did they decriminalise everything recently as well?
Is that something that you believe in?
I'm not sure, if I'm being honest, because we can look at the Portuguese model and it's not as successful as we think when we really look into it. You know, it's not as successful. We only see what the newspapers publish or what's on the news, but when you look behind the scenes, it's not as successful as we think it is. Then we look at Scotland as a very different culture from Portugal or America or anywhere else. And I just don't know where I am with legalising drugs. I don't know yet where I am. Do I think we should decriminalise some drugs? Yes, I do. I think that I know too many people that are going to prison for bits of cannabis because they've been stopped 3, 4, 5, 6 times, when the reality is, a wee guy that's smoking a bit of cannabis in his house is not going to be out committing crime because he's a cabbage. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He's just wanting to sit and, you know, so he's not harming anybody. So I think things like that. But then on the flip side, when I look at the street diazepam that's going about just now with the atazolam in it, like if we were to decriminalise drugs, where would that leave street drugs like that? You know, it's very difficult to answer that. So I don't know where I'm at with it.
Would it be easier to say that we could decriminalise drug use? Drug use, aye.
I think we should decriminalise drug use. We shouldn't be punishing someone for using drugs, you know. But then it's very difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a tightrope. But the one that doesn't make sense for me is that here's a heroin strength opioid with a brand name on it and a trademark. Take this for your bad back. But if you're especially we've seen this in America, they take it off them. Now you're taking that too much, they end up on the street taking heroin. It's like straight to prison. It's like, so if your doctor writes you a prescription, and I absolutely get what you're saying about the dangers of the street drugs, but I think that if we decriminalise and we set up testing centres like they've got in Switzerland, like people can take, I think they said, I watched something that said that ecstasy deaths in Switzerland had went from a certain amount to non-existent simply by setting up these test centres and nightclubs where people could take their ecstasy tablets would test it, and the guy would say, "Don't take that," or that's only safe up to like this amount. That's a high dosage, and their deaths went through the floor. So that's the type of stuff where you're like, right, okay, but absolutely, I think that just decriminalising or legalising drugs is not like the way that we should go. You're saying that so many, the street diazepam one and the street sort of benzos is rife and crazy. But
do you have an opinion on obviously the funding that seems to be coming for the Scottish Government over the next few years? I know obviously the drug deaths and stuff, what were they talking, like 50 million or whatever? Is that money that you're likely to see or actually have an impact on your services?
If we see any of that 50 million, I will go streaking through Glasgow for a full mile. I don't know. We have never saw any money. And that's where the conflict and isolation works with. You know, there's a lot of competition when you're writing funding applications. And my experience as strategic planning and strategic creating recovery initiatives within a Scottish prison service, and now how to create that model in the community. So my experience is not a bid writer or a funding writer. You know, I don't have that university education. I don't have 10 years experience of doing it. And I don't have the time either, because it's time consuming.
Absolutely.
So it takes me maybe, depending on the funding application, a week to 2 weeks to do a funding application, where you'll have an expert that will already have all that information in a system that can copy and paste bits, you know, and get it out. I can't compete with that. That we don't have, we can't compete with funding like that. Also, we're very, very small. And because I'm quite gobby, you know, I think people like to keep you in a place. Again, it comes down to social classes, isn't it? People like to keep you somewhere because they then know where you are and they know that they have power over you. We did have a meeting with Angela Constance, and it was a very successful meeting, actually. There was no money promised, which was great, because it was a very no bullshit conversation, which I like people that will say, Natalie, here's my cards on the table with you, because I'm very much the same. You'll get my cards too. There is going to be a small amount of money that grassroots organisations can access. So I don't know when that is going to be announced, but hopefully we can get some of that. I mean, I worked for 2 years using my savings money for my mortgage for my house because we could not get funding. No one would fund us. We were so unsupported. And I'm talking about, I was begging Hamza Yusuf. I was begging the Scottish Government. I'm saying, look, here's the outcomes that we're achieving. We've got a fantastic through care plan. Can you please help us? And lo and behold, I had no money left in my savings account. I had done all my mortgage savings. And thankfully, Jackie Lowe, who saw some of our work on Twitter, had saw the struggles, asked to come up to the prison, and in front of a room of prisoners says, I'm going to give you guys 20 grand because I believe in your work. And that was the first pocket of money that we got. And then because people saw the Colin Weir Foundation invest a little bit, we got a little bit for the Robertson's Trust, and now we've got a little bit from the lottery. So, you know, hopefully now funders can start to believe in our work, because although we don't shout about outcomes, and I hate people that go, oh, we're very outcome driven and our KPIs are wonderful. And I'm like, an outcome for me is a wee guy that is managing his tenancy, managing his mental health, that he's no longer having to go to a chemist every single day, and he's working with his mentor, and he's now looking at what skills and attributes he has and what he can now contribute to society. That's an outcome for me. An outcome is not, he got out of prison, let me tick a box. We got him into accommodation, let me tick a box. Okay, he's reduced on his methadone, let me tick another. They're not outcomes for me, they're bullshit actually. The outcome is the whole person getting better.
Absolutely, and I think like I worked in the corporate world for so long, and I can tell you, in management, KPIs mean nothing, because you could send me some KPIs and some percentages, and I'll spin you a yarn. If you like, I'll take you down a rabbit hole of confusion with numbers and telling you how I've done a great job. And I think we've seen that under Blair and Brown. That's what they did. It was this whole KPI culture. Let's set targets. Let's set police targets. It sounds great for productivity, but at the end of the day, like, we know how to fucking swindle these figures, like, and
what we want is quality, no quantity. You know what I mean? When people getting the right quality support, know that they've got the quantity there. I think as we sort of start to wrap up, because we're conscious about getting close to the hour. And looking these up prior, I seen is it Unheard Voices, the event coming up on Valentine's Day? Is that right?
Yeah.
What's that? We'll give a wee chance to bump it if you like.
So Unheard Voices is exactly what it says in the tin. It's an opportunity to listen to a professional panel. So we have Loki, Dan McGarvey, who's going to talk about social classes. We then have Suzanne Zadik, who is an expert when we talk about adverse childhood trauma and how it affects babies. So like, even me as a child, I would experience adverse childhood trauma in my mum's womb because of the violence within the family home. She'll talk about that. We then have Ian Keegan-Smith, the lawyer, who'll talk about why he is so set on a trauma-informed manner working with his client groups as a solicitor. We're then going to have a politician with one of her constituents who her partner's committed suicide and she chapped every door, she was everywhere. We then have lived experience, and then I'm going to summarise it all by talking about everybody. So it's what it says in the tin, it's unheard voices, it's, these guys are a product of a broken system, and unless we create changes from the childhood, so like more prevention work, then we're going to see more guys in prison. So it's just to try and show people, look, if we don't influence change, when these kids are kids, if we don't go into schools, if we're not teaching them how to have good morals and values and standards, they're going to grow up as shitty little teenagers with attitude problems, resentments towards the whole of the world, massive chips on their shoulder. Ultimately, what are they going to do? They're going to make the wrong choices.
Yeah, absolutely. How do people connect with that Unheard Voices if they want to attend? Are they allowed to get involved?
So there is tickets on Eventbrite for it, and it will also be live on Favour UK's Facebook page. And I believe we're going to try and do it live on Twitter as well, just to try and get it across as many platforms as we can. Because I think for me, it's really, really important. As you guys says, I've got family members that grew up in trauma and that are very still much the point of view, Natalie, these guys need to really pull their socks up, because they just don't see it for what it is. And I think if we can show society that mathematicians can't solve a math problem unless they actually see it and work on it and break it down, an addict's no different. Until we see them and work with them and break them down and rebuild that solution, they're just going to go right back to the same cycle, and it's never going to change.
Absolutely.
We'll make sure we get a wee retweet of that out and stuff ahead of time.
What I was going to say is that this episode's probably going to go out a week tomorrow, but what I'm going to do is I'll just come off this call and I'll pull this section and I'll make it into a video and I'll send it to you so you can put it on Twitter and tag Darren and tag James, and then if they retweet it, it'll just get more traction and we'll put it on our Instagrams and stuff. Even if you send us the Eventbrite link, we can include it in the tweet. So I'll do that for you this afternoon.
I think I've got screen grabs it already for obviously reading up. Natalie, I think you get anything else, Paul?
No, mate, and I think it's just been great talking to you, Natalie. It really has.
I think when we talk about how people can make an impact on their community, one of the things we always talk about is enjoying the people who are fuck the government, don't sit about and wait for permission to actually make change. And hearing you talk about the work that you do, in those terms, you've just been the absolute perfect guest. Keep doing what you're doing. If there's anything at all we can help promote or get involved with, we're all about it.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Paul. I really appreciate you guys' time today just to talk about our work, because I think it's important that people hear what we're doing. And see the guys we work with, just on an ending note, because I think it's dead important to know that the guys we work with are not bad people. They just made bad choices.
Yeah.
So my job is to reinforce good values and morals and really help them to look at an ideal version of them. How can they be an ideal version of them? So, they're not bad people. They've just made really, really shit choices in life, and they're being punished for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's amazing. Thanks very much, Natalie.
I made a promise to whom will not to you, so stop the party. I tried to reconcile a life I lived a while, just stop the party. Lies like you'll never see right through it. The great desert to fade. You call the party. Feeding lies like you'll never know. I don't need to be unhappy with a life to call my own. We'll end up burning bridges sat upon a selfish throne. I will march along this path of ambitious, forceful ties. I'll be dead before it crashes down before my eyes. There is a life I can see. Life is so predictable, it must be. There is no